Welcome to today's session. In this session, we will try to understand everything about port. So, what is exactly port? How can one laptop browse Google, Netflix, YouTube, Gmail at the same time? When you say HTTP uses port 80, what does it exactly means? And why does HTTPS needs 443? And why do we have 65535 ports? Why we will have this many number of ports? And why do games ask you open port? And how firewall blocks the applications access at network level? And why can't two apps listen on the same port? All these questions, these are very interesting questions to understand, and all these questions we will try to understand in deep dive in today's session. The hero of this session is port. Everything happens, all these questions whatever we saw, right, all these questions answer lies in port. So today we are going to understand port in detail. So let's start. So what is port? First question which we try to understand is what is port. So port is a specific number, logical number you can say, is a specific logical number which help us to identify the particular process or application on the device. Okay. So if you have a multiple applications running, then those multiple application will have different port numbers. So port number basically helps to identify the application on the device, particular application on the device. So we have seen IP help us IP help us to identify device. Port help us to identify the application on device. This is the basic difference between IP and port. Now, if I want to give you example, right? So home address, your home address is your IP. Okay. And your flat number is your port. So home address can be a apartment, right? You stay in this apartment, this is your address, but your flat number is the number which exactly identifies where do you actually stay. So that is called as a port. So two people in the same building need a separate flat, right? So two application on the same device need a separate port. So it resembles with the real life concepts, right? So now this is about what is port. Now let's try to understand why we have port at first instance. Why port? So in a particular application, in a particular device, we run multiple applications. We run Chrome, we run Netflix, we run YouTube, we run Gmail. So all these application needs to communicate to internet, and when the response comes, the response has to be routed to particular application, and at the same time we need to maintain the isolation of the traffic, right? Because It should not happen like whatever request we Chrome has sent is reaching to Netflix, right? That makes the traffic collide with each other, right? So how to make this isolated? So it is made isolated with the help of port, and that's why we need port provide multiplexing. So you can run multiple application on your device with the help of port. Now, obvious question is how many applications we can run. Now, obvious question is how many port number we have. Those many applications we can run. So we have around 0 to 65 535 ports. So you can run these many applications or processes on your device. 65,535. These many processes and applications you can run at the same time on your system, because the port number is ranging from 0 to 65535. And how it is coming? Because port number is 16-bit number. So if you do 2 raised to power 16, then the answer actually comes 65536. But our ports will start from 0, right? So we are starting from 0. So that's why we have one less. That's why we have 65535. That is the logic behind it. Now TCP, UDP uses port for communication. We have now these many ports, right? So these ports needs to be categorized. So categorization of port. There is a well defined categorization of this port. So how those ports are categorized is here. So these ports are assigned to some standard services, a standard number of port. So if you see, if you are using HTTP, then the port is 80. If HTTPS port is 443, DNS 53, FTP 21, SSH 22, Telnet 23, SMTP 25, DSCP 20, 67, 68. Now what does this mean is, if you are exposing any HTTP service, then you need to host it on port number 80. If you are hosting HTTPS service, then you need to host it with port number 443. Now these are actually applicable for server, because server is the one who hosts the services, right? So this is applicable to the server. These are a standard ports. Now, who did this standardization, right? So the answer is IANA, Internet Assigned Number Authority. So they are the one who decide this. They also decide some registered port. Now, what are these registered port? Now, some of the companies, right, they run a standard application, right? SQL. The chart is here. You can see MySQL, Postgres, RDP, Docker, Splunk. All these are very standard application or services, and for them they have a port defined. This is a registered port. So for example, now if you are already using 3306 for some other application on your system and you try to host MySQL, then it will tell you that this port is already in use. You need to change that port so that MySQL you can run. So that's how these are the registered port. Now these ports are registered, these ports are standard. Now when obvious question will come, when we say that our applications on our device uses a port numbers. Now what are those ports? Those are a ephemeral port. Ephemeral port. So ephemeral ports are the ports which are assigned by OS on the fly. So for example, Chrome can use 53021 to connect with Google at 443. Now this port can change, but this port cannot change. Why? Because Chrome is trying to access Google. Now if Google has to respond to us, right? If Google is hosting its services, it is a HTTP service, HTTPS service, because they want to make it secure. So we have seen that for HTTPS, the port is 443. So Google server will host HTTPS service at 443. If tomorrow, if it think that no, I will not host at 443, I will host at 445, then their servers are not at all reachable, because this is a standard. As soon as we hit Google, right, and if it's the HTTP, then other systems assume that it is at 443. So Google has to obey that standard and host at 443. If they host at 445, nobody will stop them, but people will not able to access the Google services. Now we have seen that TCP and UDP access the port. Now they access the port for different reasons, right? So TCP has a handshake mechanism. We have seen sync, acknowledge, and that helps to make communication reliable, ordered. They have acknowledgement. All these things they TCP does, and in these things port helps them. And for UDP, we have seen no handshake, no guarantee, faster, use for streaming. So for this also they use port internally for this functionality to accomplish. So UDP used for gaming, streaming, everything, right? And TCP is for HTTPS, SSH, all these things. Now one concept which is again important is to understand is socket. Now socket is the combination of IP plus port plus protocol. The socket means a combination of these three. Now for example, if my IP is 192.168.0.203, port number is 53021, and protocol is TCP. So this is a socket, and this is the one which each browser tab of Chrome uses to uniquely identify the application. Now port works at how port works at home. Let's try to understand this quickly. So we have seen that when you access the internet, you open a Chrome and try to access a Google, you will have a ephemeral port, right? For example, 53021. Now this will go to your router. Router also hosted NAT. So what NAT does is it translates your IP into public IP, network address translation. It does. So as a part of that process, it also changes the port. It assigns the new port. So it will be with public IP with new port. That's what happens in this home network traffic, right? So this is called as a local port. This is called as a remote port because it is translated, right? So that's how actually it works for our case at home. Now in many companies you have seen that internet is blocked. Internet block. Internet doesn't work for them, work for the users. Now how do they do it? They do it with the help of port only, because they knows that all the http traffic which will go from our system goes with port number 80, on all https goes with port number 443, all emails will go with port number whatever we have seen, smtp 25, right? So we know these standards, that's why it is easy for us to block this, right? So that's why with the help of firewall we block this traffic for this particular port, so that we will not able to access this. That's how the company does actually, to block the particular applications, particular streams on the employee's laptop. One more thing, interesting concept related to port is in gaming. So if you do gaming, right? In gaming, we have, it asks you to allow inbound ports allowed. So what happens is in gaming, we have a open NAT at our system. Then we have a moderate NAT, and we have a strict NAT. So when open NAT is allowed, inbound ports allowed. When you have a limited NAT, we have a limited inbound, and when we have a strict NAT, we have no inbound. So what is their application in gaming is game needs UDP, because most of the game work on UDP. They also does port forwarding, from one port to another port forwarding they will do, because port identifies the players and sessions. So to achieve, so one thing in this, it is somewhat, you might not able to understand this as of now, but understand that gaming uses ports heavily. If it's a multiplayer games, virtual reality game, right? So they use port, and they ask you to allow this open NAT. Now another question which we try to understand related to port is why DNS hosted at 53. This is the interview question. Why DNS always hosted at port number 53? Because as we saw in the case of Google, right? So similar way, all DNS are hosted at 53, so that it is easily reachable and predictable for other system to reach to the DNS. If tomorrow, and how DNS works is, these are the system which reach out to DNS, correct, for the IP address. Now they fire the request at port number 53, because they know that the DNS listens at port number 53. The particular service on the DNS listens at 53 port number. So they fire it particularly. But again, if they host at 55, for example, then what will happen? This DNS itself is become unrecognizable, because we are firing requests to 53, but this DNS doesn't host at 53. They host at 55. So it will give error. So that's why it is standard. If you are hosting a DNS, then it has to be hosted at 53. Other port won't work, and we will not allow, we will not able to access the service. That is the thing. Now another interesting question which will be asked in the interview is, if you are running a system, if you are running a multiple application, for example Chrome. Now in Chrome, you can use multiple tabs, right? Tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. Now each tab uses, we have said that every application uses a particular port number, but in Chrome case, every tab, every session uses a different port number. So that every tab, just think it's a kind of a process, right? So every process uses a separate port number. So every tab uses a separate port number. So this one you might see 50231, 50234, 50235. All are using different port number. So unique port differentiate the tabs. So that kind of granularity tab port provide us. And this interesting thing at network layer is these ports are present in transport layer. It's a functionality of transport layer. So this is what I wanted to cover about port. These are the very important concept and the interview questions revolves around it. That's why I thought of covering this session. If you like this session, then do share, subscribe to this channel and tell your friends about my channel. And that's all about port.